Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We have a very important issue to discuss today. I'm very pleased to be joined by Asher Fredman, who is the Director for Israel at the Abraham Accords Peace Institute, as well as the Executive Director at the Miskav Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy. Asher, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to see you.
It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me back, Moshe.
Absolutely. So you write a lot, and I would encourage all of our viewers to read what you write. I'm going to share your Twitter page. I'm going to share the important article that you just wrote. But you just wrote an article about taking the U.S.-Israel alliance to new heights. It is certainly a very timely issue. And I would love it if you could share with us your top 10 recommendations to strengthen the U.S.-Israel alliance. Boil your entire beautiful article into top 10 recommendations if you can.
Thank you, Moshe, and thank you everybody for joining us. And indeed, at the Miskav Institute for National Security, as we look at the next 4 years of Israel-U.S. relations, we're trying to formulate concrete, actionable policy recommendations for how we can take our ties, our strategic alliance, our partnership to the next level. It's clear that the incoming administration, we heard that last night, the inauguration speech, is taking a new approach to American domestic policy, American foreign policy, an America First approach. And therefore, together with the tremendous potential for enhancing and deepening our strategic ties over the next 4 years, Israel will also have to, from an Israeli perspective, will have to take into account the America First perspective, the America's first foreign policy perspective, and calibrate its aims at its goals of expanding ties to that perspective. In that spirit, as Moshe mentioned, I put together a recent policy paper outlining a large number of potential pathways for strengthening our relationships. And I'll take this opportunity to sort of run quickly through a top 10, and a top 10 list, kind of BuzzFeedy like tend to be popular. So here are 10 policy recommendations in different areas. Let's begin, of course, with Iran. Iran is not only the source of instability in the Middle East, it is also and as such, the perhaps primary obstacle to President Trump's goals of ending wars in the region, being able to pivot or move U.S. assets from the region to other theaters. We also have to recall that Iran is one of China's, in fact, it's China's most important partner in the region, and China is Iran's most important importer of oil. Most of it doesn't come directly from Iran. It's sort of whitewashed via Malaysia, via Oman, via other countries. But the Iranian-Chinese access is incredibly important for both countries and for China's greater designs in the Middle East. Of course, Iran, we know, is also supplying Russia with ballistic missiles, with missiles, with drones. We know that Iran is partnering with other countries that are hostile to American interests. So the first step is the U.S. and Israel working together on a maximum pressure campaign on Iran. And that has to cover a very, very broad range of potential fields, whether that's petrochemical, financial, military, manufacturing, automotive, technological, many, many different fields. And it also has to include a number of other important targets, some of which have been sanctioned in the past. Those sanctions have simply not been enforced effectively, and some of which have not been. So, for example, that would include the Iranian ghost fleet. In fact, the ghost fleet of unregistered or ships under different flags that are carrying Iranian oil, illicit Iranian oil to China, to other countries. That would also include sanctions on any country that used Iran's system of electronic payments as a way of getting around the sanctions that Iran is currently facing in SWIFT, in the international banking system. That would, of course, include any sanctions on any entity involved in the sale or transfer of Iranian military equipment to other countries abroad, like Russia, and on any entity that is related to the IRGC. It would also include it would also include sanctions on entities or personnel that are involved in the repression of Iranian protests, of the Iranians who are calling for greater freedom and liberty in their countries. That is the first recommendation, and the United States and Israel could work closely together on, and also as opposed to in certainly under the Biden administration, that would have to be accompanied by a real and credible threat of military action. Of course, President Trump is not looking to have U.S. troops involved in more armed conflicts in the region, but a credible threat of kinetic military action would help ensure that this maximum pressure campaign is indeed as effective as possible. The second recommendation would be a matter of policy in which both the United States and Israel stated as a matter of policy that Tehran will be held responsible for the actions of its proxies. Too often, both in Israel but also in the United States, we have focused on the responding to the actions of Iran's proxies, whether that's Hezbollah, whether that's the Houthis, directly against these entities, without targeting the country that is in fact sponsoring and arming and funding and directing them, and that is Iran. And in a sense, Iran has enjoyed the best of both worlds. If these proxies are successful, if they are able to cause damage to Israel, then they can take credit, certainly in the region, for the success of their proxies. And if their proxies fail, or if their proxies are attacked and are destroyed by Israel or by the United States or other countries, they can say, "Oh, that's not us. We're not involved. We're not there. We have a degree of separation." There has to be an official policy whereby Iran is responsible for the actions of its proxies. The third recommendation relates to the internal arena within Iran. In the end of the day, we either have to, if we ever want to get to an outcome of a situation where there is a lasting and viable peace and stability in the Middle East, there are two possibilities. Either the Iranian regime needs to drastically and dramatically change its behavior. The likelihood, the realisticness of that is up for question, or there needs to be a different Iranian regime. And I think we've all seen over the past number of years the courageous people, organizations, demonstrators in Iran, also out of Iran, who are calling for freedom, for liberty, for respect for their rights, for a new form of government. And now there are, I don't want to get into too many details, but there are a number of steps that the US and Israel, the other partners could take in order to assist these people who are trying to shape the Iranian nation, which is trying to shape a better future for itself. And that could include ensuring access, for example, to secure and continuous communications, secure and continuous internet access, in order to allow them to work together. We have to recall that in the Iranian internal arena, there are numerous different groups, some of them divided by various historical divides or by geographic divides. The degree to which they're able to work together, that will enable them to stand up against the tremendous force of the Iranian regime and its various organs that are involved in repression. Moving from the Iranian arena to the greater regional arena, and the president has stated that he sees the Abraham Accords as one of his greatest achievements in his first administration and a key goal which he would like to advance and expand in his second administration. There are certainly the advancing bilateral ties with Saudi Arabia, and there's been a lot of talk about that, are quite important. But there may even be more potential, certainly in the near future, for advancing far-ranging multilateral initiatives. And these initiatives could include, for example, initiatives in the fields of economy and trade, something like the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which would revolutionize global trade by connecting East and West via the Gulf, Jordan, and Israel, from India to Europe. Indeed, in September 2023, a month before the war, the G20 met in India, and Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the US, the EU signed an MOU in order to advance this project. It's been advancing slowly, somewhat under the surface, also due to geopolitical tensions. Now is the time to bring the full impact and influence of the United States to advance this project, which would also serve an American first policy perspective because IMEC could serve as an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative and to the Iranian-Russian North-South corridor, and could help create a U.S.-aligned belt of prosperity and stability through the Middle East. Other multilateral initiatives could include a Middle East defense alliance, strengthening the I2U2 Israel, India, UAE, US framework, various projects in the fields of health, food, and water. The possibilities are tremendous. Number 5. What we've seen since the start of the war is the continuation of diplomatic ties between the Abraham Accords countries, strategic ties, economic ties have even grown. If we compare 2024 to 2023, we see that trade with the UAE has grown 8%, with Bahrain 850%, with Morocco 48%, with Egypt 39%, and even trade between Israel and Jordan has grown in 2024 by 3%. What has largely slowed down is the people-to-people warm ties that were particularly, which are what made the Abraham Accords unique and different than Israel's previous peace treaties with Jordan, with Egypt. Now, there's going to take a lot of work to rebuild those ties. Having the United States involved in three-way projects, three-way initiatives, the United States or potentially other partners from Europe, whether it's Germany or the UK or the EU, could be key in creating space and legitimacy for once again bringing together youth leaders, innovation leaders, cultural leaders, meaning you have an outside party from the United States, from Israel, and then from one of the Abraham Accords countries cooperating together. And we have to remember that they're specifically in the area of cultural understanding, interreligious understanding, interfaith tolerance, and dialogue. There are already a number of very important initiatives in the region. One of the most prominent, perhaps, is the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi, which is this incredible complex in Abu Dhabi, where you have a church and a mosque and a synagogue all together in the same complex, symbolizing the UAE's commitment to dialogue and tolerance between the three Abrahamic religions. And based and built on that culture and that physical site, which represents a larger commitment to tolerance and dialogue, that would be, I think, a good starting point for starting to rebuild the ties between the various nations. Number 6, moving to, I think we're at 6, right? I don't want to lose count. But if we look towards the Israel-U.S. bilateral ties, and we've certainly seen over the past year and over the past number of years very strong cooperation between Israel and the United States on defense and on security, but there are opportunities and there are ways to take that to the next level. And as you may be aware, as an example, the US is part of a framework called the Five Eyes, together with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK, which is sort of the highest level of intelligence sharing. But it's not just intelligence sharing, it's also access to advanced technologies, it's to R&D, to various different intelligence and security projects. Now, US-Israel cooperation is enabling both countries to meet various severe challenges throughout the Middle East and across the world. And to the degree that we increase that cooperation, our servicemen and women, our militaries will be safer and more secure, our homelands, our cities will be safer and more secure, and we will be able to meet the threats from terrorism, from extremism, whether that's Sunni extremist groups, whether that's Iran and its proxies, whether that's other hostile nations, we will be able to meet those better. So now is the time to take that cooperation to the next level, especially as we are on the verge of revolutionary changes in the fields of military technologies, whether that is high energy laser systems, whether that's space and satellite technologies, whether that is unmanned systems, hypersonic missiles, the capabilities of AI, the capabilities of cyber. Now is the time to deepen that cooperation. 7, I'm losing track. Moshe, your job is to keep me on track. 7, with all that being said, in the Israel-US Defense Memorandum of Understanding, which was signed or came into effect in 2018 under President Obama, is set to be up in 2028, which means that likely in the very near future, negotiations will begin between Israel and the US over what the next MOU that serves as the framework for our security and defense cooperation, what that should look like. And here I think we have an opportunity to make a change that will serve both Israeli and American interests. So to date, the emphasis in the current MOU, certainly as we progress towards 2028, is American foreign military financing for Israel. So the provision of American aid, most of which, in fact, almost all of which is spent now in the United States for Israel. Now, I think that Israel, there are certainly actors within Israel that would like to see that continue, that would find it very convenient to be given a check by the United States to spend on the purchase of military equipment. I think that Israel should give a long and hard and serious thought about, first of all, how it develops its own domestic production capabilities. And that's something that we saw the need for, obviously, over the past year and a half. And we don't always know who, President Trump obviously is a friend of Israel, but we don't always know who will be in the White House looking 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, but also moving the emphasis, the weight, the center of gravity in the U.S.-Israel defense relationship from foreign military financing to greater joint initiatives, joint projects, R&D, not just with the large military industrial companies, but also with smaller innovative technology companies on both sides. That would also allow the United States to decrease over time, decrease the amount of aid that it's giving directly from the United States to Israel. And that is one of the goals of President Trump. On the other hand, it would allow both the US and the Israeli defense and military industries and militaries to develop together the new systems and new technologies that would allow both of them to face the very significant challenges that our democracies will face in the coming years. 8, of course, that cooperation is not only in the military sphere, as I'm sure many of you are experiencing in your own daily lives. The artificial intelligence is revolutionizing so many aspects of our daily lives, from defense to finance to consumers, to so many aspects of how we receive information, how we process information, and how we output information. And here I want to propose, and there's already a legislative proposal, I believe now, of Secretary of State Rubio, formerly of Senator Rubio, of establishing a U.S.-Israel jointly funded artificial intelligence center that would fund and promote and sponsor partnerships between government entities, research institutions, private sector entities, startups in the fields of AI, in order to ensure our joint leadership in this field. Because as the United States faces the challenges of global great power competition from China, from other countries, ensuring leadership in AI is going to be a critical element of ensuring American leadership in this competition. And the deeper there's collaboration between the US and Israel, and here also potentially with other Abraham Accords partners, the UAE is investing quite a lot also in its domestic AI development. We could envision perhaps a throughway partnership, US, Israel, UAE in the field of AI. This is a critical area to deepen our cooperation. The 9th area is, going back to the international arena, is the challenge posed by international courts that threaten, of course, Israeli servicemen and women and leaders, but also American servicemen and women and leaders. They threaten the sovereignty of our nations because our countries have not joined the International Criminal Court, but now we are facing investigations by the International Criminal Court. And there's much room for cooperation in countering that. Now, we already saw the first steps of that with President Trump reasserting the sanctions that he asserted in his first administration that were canceled by President Biden, which essentially would block the property of certain members of the ICC that are involved in the investigations of the US or of a US ally that is not part of the court. Blocking the US-based property would largely also block their access to the American banking system, in certain ways the international banking system, and would present a visa ban on their entry to the United States. That is a very important first step. There are further steps, perhaps related to sanctions on the court itself, that should be advanced and should be taken. And lastly, also looking at the international arena, we have the United Nations and its constituent bodies. Now, the United Nations is not only a center or a fount of anti-Israeli and anti-American initiatives, decisions. We have to remember this is a body that is, to a large extent, is driven by the interests of dictatorships, of hostile countries. It is also a tremendous waste of taxpayer money. President Biden was handing over about 18 billion, 19 billion of US taxpayer dollars to the UN over the last several years. And that money is funding the salaries of a vast network of bureaucrats and corrupt bureaucracies and institutions, many of which are also promoting an anti-Israel and an anti-American agenda. And obviously, UNRWA, the UNRWA is a obvious choice for an agency that has been defunded, that should be defunded once again. But we have to recall there are actually many UN affiliated bodies that are involved in taking US taxpayer dollars and in order to advance an anti-American and an anti-Israel agenda. And we've seen that on the part of the UNHRC, UNESCO, the UN special bodies on Palestinian rights, UNIPAL, the UN Division of Palestinian Rights. In fact, if you actually start digging down, you'll find perhaps dozens of entities that are all involved, that all have one purpose, which is delegitimizing Israel and promoting the interests of dictatorships, non-democracies, countries that are opposed to the interests of the United States, advancing those interests in the international arena. And a key recommendation is for the United States and Israel to do a careful study of the entire vast UN system. And anybody that is involved in promoting such an agenda should be subject to immediate defunding. So those are 10 of my recommendations. There are many others in the paper, but I think that's a good overview.
Asha, this was fantastic. I have so many questions. I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but let me start. You gave your top 10 recommendations, and broadly speaking, many of them can fit into one of two buckets, what we'd say the Sur Merah and the Asay Tov. Fighting Iran, focusing on defense and building a coalition, and then the economic development in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords. And I'd be curious to know what is the relationship you see between the two. So, for example, you mentioned the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor that goes from India to the UAE, Saudi Arabia brings it to Europe, to France, Germany, Italy, and whatnot. I'd be curious to know how building out these connections would, if any way, harm Iran or bring down the regime? Meaning, is there a correlation between the strength of these countries and in weakening the regime?
Iran threatens obviously Israel and the United States, but it also threatens the moderate peace-seeking countries of the Middle East in general. Let's recall that while Israel has faced Houthi attacks over the past year, countries like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, have faced thousands of Iranian-sponsored Houthi attacks over the past decades, which have hit oil fields, airports, which have caused very significant damage. Iran and its proxies are opposed to this vision of regional cooperation, both because they are dedicated to weakening Israel, don't want to see Israel integrated into the region more generally, and also for, in a sense, purely economic interests in which Iran has aligned itself with China, with Russia. We saw, for example, a very clear example of that when Iran essentially brought China into the Middle East to oversee a diplomatic engagement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So instead of the Abraham Accords and a US-led initiative, also you had China playing the peace broker in the Middle East. And China is looking to invest in, build ports, railways, roadways in order to control this vital area of the world, which is key to global resilience, which is key to global prosperity, which is key, obviously, to global energy. So countering Iran and its proxies will also directly contribute to regional cooperation and to the creation of a US-aligned economic prosperity in the region.
Okay, final question. With the US-Israel MOU coming up for renewal and this new America First focus, are you concerned? that the MOU will be negatively impacted by the change in politics in the U.S.?
Again, the question is, what does negatively impact it? Because it's true, there are elements in Israel that would just like to get as much money as possible. And there's no doubt that the security threats that we are facing are going to face are going to increase. And as the Nagel Committee recommended, Israel is going to have to increase its defense budget. But I think that looking at the medium term, the long term, from a strategic perspective, not just short term, I think beginning to decrease Israel's dependence on US foreign military financing, building our own domestic industries, and deepening the win-win cooperation between our industries and our innovation, which exists, certainly exists, the Iron Dome, but can be increased to a far greater degree in the medium and long term. That would be good for America and good for Israel, and align with the America First world perspective.
Asher Fredman from the Institute for the Miskov Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your deep knowledge with us. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. I'm going to share something with you now because it's important for later this week. Our Thursday briefing is going to be fantastic. They're all fantastic, especially this one right now with Asher. But our Thursday briefing is not going to be recorded. It will not be uploaded onto YouTube. So make sure, if you want to hear what we have to say on Thursday, to join the live Zoom briefing. Thank you to all our reviewers and supporters for tuning in. We'll be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.